Hi everybody, Mr. Johnson here, and this is our lesson video on the basics of drawing. Now, if you have a lot of drawing experience, some of this may be already very obvious to you. If you've never drawn before or have drawn very little, these are going to be some tips that will really help you improve your drawing skills. So, let's take a look at some of the basic tips of drawing. The very first tip is to draw what you see. So in your sketchbook, please write down tip number 1, draw what you see. And I'll explain what that means. So drawing what you see means that the best way to draw is to look at your subject in front of you and then draw only the parts of that subject that are visible to you from that angle. So in the example that's on the screen, there's a still life arrangement set up with a bowl of fruit, a glass of water, a paper airplane, and a stapler. And then the drawing of that is on the right. So if you look at the drawing on the right, the artist has drawn what they see. And what that means is that because this part of the paper airplane overlaps the bottom of the stapler, they did not draw the bottom of the stapler. Because the orange is cropped off of the left side, they cropped the orange off of the left side. Because the water glass is overlapped by the bowl and the airplane, the water glass is overlapped by the bowl and the airplane. If you can't see the end of the stapler, don't draw it. If you can't see the very point on the end of the paper airplane, don't draw it. So drawing what you see is all about taking time to slow down and really look at your subject. If you're starting to just draw shapes and lines, you're not really looking right at that subject. So take time to really slow down and remember to only draw what you can see from your vantage point. That's the best, the biggest key to accurate drawing. All right, the second tip you should write down is to start with simple shapes. And this is a great trick for drawing any subject. So if you see in the example on the screen, there's a photograph of a flamingo, and then the artist has broken down that subject into basic shapes like ovals, triangles, and rectangles. So here they've said the beak is basically a triangle, the head is basically an oval, the neck is made up of two rectangles, again the body basically an oval, the tail a triangle, and then they've drawn those same simple shapes on the paper. What this does is creates a structure of your subject. Now on top of that, you can go and start adding the details and refining the shapes. Eventually, you would erase these lines completely out of your drawing. But starting with simple shapes is a great way to break down any subject, even the most complicated of subjects. So if you're looking at something, you're saying, I don't know how to draw this face or this animal or this car or this landscape, whatever it is, think about it in terms of breaking down each element of that subject into basic, simple shapes, draw those shapes on your paper, and then refine them by adding detail. All right, the third tip to write down in your sketchbook is to draw lightly. I can't emphasize this enough. Look at the sketch on the screen of this plate of fruit, how lightly the artist has drawn these lines. And there are two main reasons for that. The first one is that drawing lightly allows you to erase those lines more completely. If you press very heavily with your pencil and you make dark marks, you're not able to erase them all the way, no matter how much you really try. So draw lightly so that lines can be erased. And then secondly, drawing lightly allows you to change those lines when you add value, texture, color, or whatever it is on top of this sketch. If you draw dark, heavy lines, you'll see them through colored pencil, marker, a watercolor, shading, whatever it might be. And the lines that you start with, like this on the screen, you don't want to see those at the end. These are just your basic lines to start. So always start drawing lightly. And the final tip you should write down in your sketchbook, tip number 4, practice. I know it sounds hackneyed to say that practice makes perfect, but it really does. So if you are working on drawing eyes like this artist here, draw them over and over again. The first eye you draw will not be the best. It won't, because it's the first time you do it. Just like if you're learning basketball, the first free throw attempt may not be perfect. But if you practice it all the time, you will get much better at it. So please practice, practice, practice. All right, I'm going to show you some tips. In this video...
Hi, I'm Paul Priestley, and this video is part one of my series of art tutorials for beginners on learning to draw. The series covers basic techniques such as holding a pencil and using edges and outlines, as well as topics such as creating depth using tone, understanding eye level, and so much more. We start here with part one, which looks at various ways of holding a pencil to create different effects and explains the difference between outlines and edges. So don't hang about, grab your pencil and let's get started.
All right.
To start with, what we're going to do is to look at how we hold a pencil. It's not a good idea to hold a pencil right down there by the tip, because if you do, what tends to happen is that you tend to hold the pencil too tightly, your hand becomes rigid here, and it's very difficult to move. Plus, with this sticking to the paper, you can only move short distances with a pencil point. So that's not a good idea. What I would suggest is that you hold the pencil between a finger and the thumb like this, a couple of centimetres from the end, put your other finger behind, hold it nice and loosely so that you can move your fingers and your hand. Okay? This way you can move your wrist can help and become almost like a compass. So for example, a couple of things to practice. If you're going to draw a line, then simply use your fingers. So we draw a line. Very, very simply, just draw a line. Try not to use the little dig, dib, dib, dab, dab sort of effect. That obviously can have some uses, but normally just flicking with a pencil like that, keep it nice and bold, nice and strong. If you want to draw a curve, again, use the wrist. The wrist will provide you with the means of producing a curve. So all we need to do is to use the lines. You see, use our hands, draw the curves, and you can see them quite clearly. With our wrist, we could also draw circles. I can just simply use my fingers here, you see, my fingers, or I can use my wrist to draw a circle, you see, and I can draw circles. It's very simple to do, and as you can see here, I'm producing lines which are somewhat slightly off line, but that doesn't matter. It gives a nice unique feel to it. You see, this is my circle. It's different from any other circle. It's unique. It's mine. So I can draw circles in this sort of way as well. Now we also need to learn how to use shading. Now shading can also be done in two ways. We can use the point of the pencil, and when I shade I can use line and I get a particular effect like this, you see, and I can fade away almost to nothing. But if I turn my pencil around and I hold my pencil inside my palm, you see, like this, hold the pencil like this, turn it over, now use the side of the pencil, we can get a totally different type of shading, much smoother, no lines, no banding. You can gradually change from light tone to a very, very pale tone. Now, it's worth practicing these techniques because it all helps with the basic drawing itself.
So in your sketchbook, right, while we're watching these videos and you're taking your notes, try practicing all of these. And these are very simple. You can do it right along with the video while we're watching it right now. And it can be just a small little area, but these will really help you just get a feel for the different ways you can hold the pencil, different techniques you can try, right, as we go along.
The other thing, we can apply the shading to the lines by using something called edges or outlines. Imagine this. If I was to draw a very simple shape here, I'll just draw a very simple oval shape. I've got a nice oval curve here. I just draw a couple of lines down the side here, and we make it into a very simple cylinder shape. Now you notice I'm using outline. I'm going to do exactly the same here because I just want to show you the two slightly different techniques. So I've now got two little boxes here, little tin shapes, and a little curve underneath.
And watch the difference between these.
With these, now I'm going to go over this and just press on quite hard and produce an outline, which is what a lot of people will tend to do. They will tend to draw with quite a strong amount of pressure on their pencil, and they've drawn it very dark like this. I'm going to do the same here. It's always a good idea, by the way, when you're drawing, to sketch something out very lightly first, then go over it when you think you've got it quite correct. Now, I just want to show you how we can vary the shading so that in one drawing we create edges, and the other drawing we create outlines. Now, in this drawing here, if I start shading this, I'm going to turn my pencil over again and so on. So I start shading here, and I put my shading down the side of my tin here. You see, coming down here, and come across my tin here, like this. Now, the problem we've got with this is that we can still see the outline. And the problem is sometimes when we see the outline, it tends to flatten our drawing. You see here? Imagine I can see inside my item here, so this might be a little darker here and it gets lighter as it comes away. Now, if you look at this, this has got some shading on it, as you can see. It's also got a strong outline. What we need to do is to get rid of the outline. With this, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but this time I'm creating an edge.
This is the one that we want to do.
The outline disappear. So, if I do my shading down here this time, and I'm making the shading very, very dark, so that I begin to get rid of my edges. And as I get rid of my edges, the whole thing appears more three-dimensional.
All right, so he's going to speed this up as he adds more shading to it. But this is something really important to keep in mind as you're shading. Right? We don't want those big outlines.
I'm going to do exactly the same in here. I'm going to make very dark shading so the outline disappears.
So he's going to continue that.
Now, I'm only partly finished, but what I'm going to do now is just shade down the side here, the outside of the line. And when I shade down the outside of the line, I create another edge here, you see?
Oh, look how pretty that is.
If we look at the two drawings, you can see on this one that we can still see the outline. And the outline will tend to flatten the drawing. Whereas in this drawing, it looks much more three-dimensional because we've created edges. You can't see the outlines anymore. And because we've got rid of the outlines, the whole thing looks more three-dimensional. You'll notice I've shaded behind here in the background and shaded over here as well, so I can get rid of the outline on this side too. So we can create a much more interesting effect. Now this is the first of a number of videos I'm going to be...
All right, so he's going to talk more about more videos in his series. But what I love about these two examples is that this very clearly shows the difference between outlines and edges. So in the first example, there is shading here, but it's still mostly an outline drawing. In the second one, they've created a much better three-dimensional effect by doing two things. The first one is that the shading is much darker at the edge. So you want it either as dark as the outline, even darker. That makes that line disappear. So here on the left side, the shading isn't as dark as the line, so you still notice that outline. So you want to make sure your shading is just as dark. The second thing that they do is they've included shading outside of the object as well. And this gives that object a location that it's in. It gives it some depth and dimension. It illustrates the space around it. So by shading the background space, instead of just seeing this flat edge here, it really creates the illusion that the object is more three-dimensional. So hopefully you practiced these techniques in your sketchbook. And there's one last thing that I'd like you to do. Shrink myself a little bit more here. All right, I'd like you to try setting up a single object in front of you. Find anything from your home and look at it. So get the actual object and put it in front of you, like this tomato drawing. Uh, Remember to draw what you actually see, not what you think you see. And I'll explain what that means. Sometimes I find students draw what they think they see, and that is knowing that an apple has a stem, right? So everyone knows that an apple has a stem. But if you can't see the stem from your point of view, don't draw it, right? We all know that flowers have petals and have that center, but if it's turned from the side and you can't see the center, don't draw it. So only draw what you can see. Start with simple shapes, draw lightly, and then add shading and details last. Now you can use any of the objects in your drawing kits. You have drawing pencils, you have a blending stump, which you can see actually in the photo, the person is using this blending stump. That helps smooth out your pencil shading, so play around with that. The sandpaper in there is a way to clean and sharpen your blending stump, so when they get dirty, you can wipe it off on the sandpaper. All right, use the erasers to add the highlights and have fun. Let me know how it goes.